Here is a video no one was asking for. If you haven't noticed yet, I'm a big fan of fashion, particularly vintage mid-century fashion. I'm pretty sure BioShock has influenced my admiration for the style in some way. Say what you want about the DLC, Elizabeth's look and burial at sea. As I'm an avid admirer of this time period of style and an enormous BioShock fan, I'm also a big fan of history, therefore making me a historical fashion fanatic. What better topic to cover than the fashion of BioShock? In today's video, we will be looking back to the history and fashion of the early 20th century to the mid-century and breaking down the connection between real-world examples and that which exists in-game. The 20th century began under the continued style of the Edwardian period, with women clothed in long, elegant skirts, an S-shaped silhouette of ample bust and hips, and modest natural makeup with an emphasis on demure, naturalistic beauty. This style prevailed into the 1910s, with the ideal of the Gibson girl continuing to be the standard of female beauty. During this time, however, the figure softened in silhouette, loosening and flattening on the form as the waistline shifted from the natural waist to under the bust, known as the empire waist. Men's attire from this period consisted mainly of sack coats and waistcoats with matching trousers, short hair and well-manicured facial hair, such as short-trimmed beards and curled mustaches. Men's blazers also appeared in mainstream fashion at this time, worn for casual and sporting events. Tailcoats, also known simply as tails, would be worn in the evening for formal events. Neckties were essential. Many of these styles should be familiar to fans of the series who've played through BioShock Infinite. We can see mostly accurate depictions of the style of the time period of 1912. This era of history is often referred to as the Progressive Era in America, a period of time that, due to technological innovations and rapid change in culture and society, saw many progressive reformations in politics. Although very much absent from the storyline of Infinite, women's fashion took a freer, looser type of dress that reflected the transitory nature of American culture at that time. Hemlines for both women and men rose as day-to-day life brought outdoor activities as social engagements. This change reached its peak in the 1920s as the flapper became the iconic it girl of the decade. The hemlines of clothing tantalized as they reached to the knee, and how scandalous if a flash of knee were to show, this being the first time in Western history that women's fashion allowed the bare leg to show. The role of women in society and the style of dress go hand in hand as they experienced more freedoms such as earning the vote, integrating with the workforce, and living freer lifestyles such as going to dance halls and driving automobiles. As the United States and various European countries experienced a flourishing of wealth during the Roaring Twenties, many new beauty items and ready-to-wear clothing were introduced to the public that could in turn be purchased with extra funds on superfluous products. Not without its critics, the decade saw bolder makeup with red and dark lipsticks, bobbed hair as opposed to the former standard of long, natural, uncut hair, and a shapeless silhouette with dropped waistline and shortened skirts to reveal the legs. Pants for women also mirrored a woman's role in society as they continued to join the previously male-only workforce due to the war effort. Men began wearing pinstripe, tweed, and flannel suits, as a three-piece suit was reserved for formal functions as they fell away to simpler daytime attire. Art Deco, a style of design and the key architectural design of Rapture, also flourished during this time. In the United States, Art Deco was commonly associated with skyscrapers, government buildings, cinemas, cars, and train stations, often being blended with other styles of design to create a clean, luxurious look. During this time, it was considered peak luxury and associated highly with wealth and glamour, as much of its materials consisted of very expensive mediums, with the highest, most excellent craftsmanship required. The androgynous nature of the 20s began to give way to more form-fitting clothing as the 1930s rolled around. Women's dresses went from baggy and shapeless to hugging the body, a similar thin, athletic body that was in vogue in the 1920s, reintroducing femininity to style with simple lines and the return to the natural waist. However, trousers for women became further mainstream during this time, with the likes of Marlene Dietrich and Katharine Hepburn sporting them, having originally been introduced to fashion by Coco Chanel in the mid-1920s. Military-inspired dress also became popular in menswear, such as the trench coat and bomber jacket. Many more formal pieces were falling out of fashion for men, such as spats, gloves, canes, and the stiff-collared shirt, except in more formal settings. The type of men's suits also altered slightly, with broad shoulders falling to a slender, fitted torso and waist, sporting tapered sleeves. Hollywood had heavy influence over the fashion of the period, while the Great Depression left people seeking the escapism of cinema. While Joan Crawford and Clark Gable simpered and sulked on the silver screen, men and women of the working class sat, enchanted, in their simpler garments, dreaming to look just as bewitching and glamorous as the stars. Evening wear for women saw the popularity of the silk evening gown, much like a floor-length nightgown. It was tighter at the waist and flared out just slightly at the ankles, accentuating the woman's figure. The nipped waist and curved silhouette remained into the 1940s. America did not join World War II until 1941, but rationing would pose issues for the American public, including the limiting of the amount of materials that could be used for clothes making. This caused simplicity in the style of dress with the introduction of uniform skirt suits and utility dresses, which attempted to capture a sense of style in its sleek proportions, yet the stranglehold of war was felt by all. Many women were strongly encouraged to adopt updos for their hair in order to ensure workplace safety, as long curled hair had returned to popular style. Like women's fashion, menswear suffered the effects of wartime, seeing the majority of men either re-wearing suits of the 1930s, or, most often than not, wearing their uniforms in day-to-day life. Also during this time, the zoot suit rose to style among Black and Latino men, with these gentlemen purchasing suits that were sizes too large and having them tailored more to fit. During wartime, this was seen as offensive and a waste of material, but that didn't stop the suits from being stylish through the 1950s, where they would eventually fall out of favor. While the infamous zoot suit riots of LA left a horrid mark on the culture of the time, these suits can still be seen to this day worn by men who keep the style and tradition associated with it alive. Despite the surrender of Germany in May of 1945, America and Japan continued warring in the Pacific, bringing out new technology that would swiftly see the end of the war. The United States dropped nuclear bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August of 1945, and less than 10 days later the Japanese would surrender. The devastation of such a weapon did not go unnoticed. One of which who noticed was Rapture's founder, Andrew Ryan, who felt, with weaponry such as this, the world would destroy itself soon enough. Already disillusioned with the current political systems in place, Andrew Ryan viewed the bombing of Japan as the final straw and began secret construction of the independent underwater city of Rapture in 1945. Following the war, many were starved for glamour and finery, and Christian Dior delivered in 1947 with his introduction of the new look, featuring a jacket of rounded shoulders, cinched waist, and flared peplum-styled hem, with a complementary pleated A-line skirt in black. This garment was known as the bar suit, and it took the world by storm. The silhouette of the outfit became the mainstream look of the 1950s. Christian Dior, who became a pillar of haute couture during this decade, also played around with ideas borrowed from menswear, mingling familiar, streamlined silhouettes with minimalist design throughout the era, also present in other designers' work at the time. Women were expected to keep their hair off the shoulders to show their maturity, with long hair and ponytails associated with children. Think the classic sock hop look. Hair coloring became possible at home with the invention of at-home rinses, mostly encouraged for women who begin to have grays. Henna dye was a popular rinse that was best known to be used by comedienne Lucille Ball. Blue jeans were popularized in mainstream fashion by actors like Marlon Brando and James Dean. Hats slowly lost favor in fashion as the 1960s grew closer. Youth culture became the center of the fashion world, marketing clothing strictly for the new identity of teenager. Truly, choices like never before were available to the public by way of shape, pattern, material, accessories, all allowing for more individual style. As previously mentioned, Rapture began construction in 1945 after Andrew Ryan witnessed the atomic bomb and concluded the world as it currently was doomed. His distaste for government intervention with regulations of big business and the continued formation of social programs for disenfranchised members of society had already affected his connection to society at large, viewing anyone who didn't quote-unquote earn their keep as a parasite. The bomb was the straw that broke, or annihilated, the camel's back, seeing it as the parasite's tool to obliterate what they couldn't seize, and the city of Rapture was born. I think it's important that we examine Andrew Ryan's life and work briefly to get an idea of what the design of Rapture meant to him, as well as the game designers, and what he wanted to communicate to those that came to Rapture. Let's look back at the Art Deco period of the 1920s and 30s. Recall that I mentioned the fact that Art Deco was a design style associated with luxury, big business, wealth, and glamour. Not only did it communicate many values Andrew Ryan, and the world as a whole, associated with success, but it also literally required skilled work to create out of fine, expensive materials. If we go back, Andrew Ryan came to the U.S. in 1919, and in the following decades saw the literal rise of Art Deco-style skyscrapers, the sleek automobile, all incredible tributes to man's wealth and power. To the culture at the time, Art Deco was modern, rich, and a testament to the endless capabilities of America's elite. Andrew Ryan came into wealth by the way of discovering oil and investing his money in moves that saw him owning an oil company and stocks in coal and railroads. His rise to success followed along the rise of many other similar businessmen, such as Howard Hughes, who he is significantly based on, and with this was the height of the Art Deco style. Even when the Great Depression hit, Art Deco was reserved for design and industrial areas that Ryan frequently worked in. I believe it's fair to assume that, to Andrew Ryan, Art Deco equaled wealth, skill, and prosperity. In the years following the end of the war and the Depression, Art Deco fell out of favor due to its ornamentation and association with the wealthy class. But to Andrew Ryan, who rebuked the way society was going, this was a style that was respectable as the peak of luxury design. Back on track, understanding the basis of Rapture and its design helps us go forward with forming an idea of its fashion landscape. People began to arrive in Rapture on November 5, 1946, with the majority of the city completed by the end of the 1940s. Another important aspect to examine is the type of people Andrew Ryan recruited to live in the city. It is noted that he only invited like-minded, bright individuals, which would require us again to inspect who Andrew Ryan himself is. We have established that he is of the upper class, a self-made millionaire with a dedication to intellect and a strong work ethic. It would make sense that other members of the upper class were invited to Rapture. For the time being, we will put aside the fact that laborers were required to build and maintain the city, therefore introducing quote-unquote lower social classes, a snag in Ryan's dream of Rapture. We'll return to it later on. For now, we'll focus on the types of citizens Ryan imagined. It's a good start to look at the people Ryan himself kept within his circle, the people he boasted the skill of in their respective fields. Many, if not all, of his associates came from the upper echelon of the surface, or were acclaimed in some way that saw them out of poverty. It goes without saying that people of this social class have certain expectations and wants in their goods. I think a good way to express what I mean is to briefly discuss the aesthetic differences between our favorite mid-century themed video games, BioShock and Fallout. I had been doing some thinking about it and came to the realization that while Fallout is like American patriotism, summer barbecues, baseball and apple pies, BioShock is dinner at the Waldorf, shopping on Fifth Avenue, and cocktails at high-class nightclubs. I feel bringing up this comparison will help demonstrate what I mean by the expectations of the majority of citizens in Rapture. The aesthetic was not the middle working class, but of the upper crust of 1940s society. The financial success or failure of citizens didn't matter in Rapture, where everyone is expected to excel. The glitzy high life was the standard and the only image of success. The city was literally not designed to accommodate the lower classes, which, as we know, would cause dire issues later on. Understanding this class difference helps us perceive the baseline and expectation of the city and its citizens. To further understand, I feel it's useful to look forward to Rapture's timeline and determine a theory of its fashion and style. Whatever existed within the city of Rapture had to come from the world on the surface. While Andrew Ryan wanted it to exist in a vacuum, it would be impossible to keep out any previous influence. I'm sure, as long as it didn't pose a risk to his political or economic ideology, it was fine to bring in outside influences. We don't get much in the way of the fashion side of Rapture, aside from glimpses of the golden age of the city, what's left of what splicers wear, and interactions with in-game character models. Using these as our guide, however, I feel it's possible to figure out its mainstream style. As the final citizens arrived to Rapture in 1951, I think it's safe to say that's the last instance of the possibility of influence from the surface, at least fashion-wise. From then on, there would be no further progression of fashion aside from whatever could be done within Rapture. As the 1950s brought further change in style and its shift to focusing on the newly founded youth culture, the same doesn't seem to be true within Rapture. Rapture would be a kind of time capsule of the 1940s, 1950s style, as it seems what was popular when the first large groups of people arrived stayed popular until the Civil War. The focus of couture remained on the mature styles in its approach to women's and men's fashion, keeping the pinnacle of fashion as being fitted for young adults and onward as opposed to the teenage craze of the 60s. The culture of Rapture appears quite clear when it comes to teenagers and children, echoing a seen and not heard sentiment that was incredibly common among the previous generations of Rapture citizens. In fact, Rapture does not value children or childhood, as so eloquently put by Elizabeth in the Burial at Sea DLC, and it is only out to make profit where the opportunity lurks. Its major purpose, or perhaps its initial one, which can be seen in Andrew Ryan's creation of Ryan Amusements and the Ryan the Lion Preparatory Academy, was to bring up children to be obedient, functional members of Rapture's community. Had it not been for the discovery of Adam, I'm sure that would have been the way it would have gone, at least for a while. I know she doesn't show up in this outfit until the DLC of the final game, but I just can't help myself. I think the Burial at Sea DLC gives us relatively better examples of accurate attire for the time period, and I'd like to go over one, if not the, most memorable character design of the BioShock series. Elizabeth's Burial at Sea outfit is simple yet makes a statement. Simplicity was, after all, very fashionable for the 1940s. By its design alone, we can tell its quality as the entire outfit is coordinated by black and white details. The top is a white button-up, long-sleeve number with contrasting black cuffs lined in white. The skirt is black and pencil-line, with white lining the hem and down the flanks of the skirt. The little pops of red are seen in her belt, the necktie-styled piece held together by her brooch, which did in fact exist in fashion at the time, and her lip color. She wears fishnet tights with a seam up the back, which I find curious, as fishnets weren't really the everyday type. Most images found of fishnets from back then came from women in performance wear, like dancers or actresses, usually a part of some type of costume. Her fishnets almost look more like crisscross patterns over black. She finishes the outfit with a kitten-heeled, T-strap pair of Mary Janes. Her hair is in a page boy style, which was relatively popular for the time, seeing its debut in the 1940s with similar styles from Lauren Bacall and Veronica Lake. To achieve this style, one would have to roll or pin curl the hair in a certain way, then sculpt the hair to its sleek shape. Within the last decade or so, model and burlesque dancer Dita Von Teese popularized the style again and may have served as inspiration for Elizabeth's hairdo. Her makeup to me is interesting. There is the classic winged liner, the manicured arched eyebrows, and the classic red lip. Yet we have a smoky eye kind of deal going on here, which I think is interesting, as black eyeshadow wasn't particularly stylish in this time period. Women of the era normally wore skin tone or no shadow on the lids, with the mainstream colors being blue or green, or other shades in that range. It usually wasn't very heavy or bright. The black color, I believe, comes from the 1920s, and yet even then the average woman didn't wear that color. It was considered very bold and oftentimes was for evening wear, which was being mimicked from film actresses. So the choice of the black eyeshadow is interesting to me, which could be interpreted as a potential deviation from societal norm and could be specifically a part of Rapture's fashion culture. Despite Elizabeth not organically existing in this time, I do think she picked up the inspiration from somewhere. This segues into my next idea. The 1920s seem to have a pretty decent influence in Rapture, particularly in its fashion. The next character I'd like us to look at would be Anya Andersdotter. Anya Andersdotter was a shoe designer in Rapture, but you'll remember her as the woman who tried to assassinate Andrew Ryan, and whose body is hung up along the entryway to his office in the Hephaestus stage of the first game. If you were to line up all the audio diary portraits from the first game, Anya would be the one who stood out to you. At least she did to me. Her hairstyle itself set her apart, as the rest of the women sport trendy styles of the time. Anya is the only one who has a very obvious 1920s hairdo inspired by actress Louise Brooks. No other character has this hairstyle in the photo lineup. However, there is another character that has this exact same hair, and that would be the Baby Jane Splicer model. Working under the assumption that Baby Jane model is meant to represent multiple characters instead of just one, we can see that the 1920s Louise Brooke hairstyle was very popular among women in Rapture. Since Anya was someone who worked in the fashion industry of Rapture, I think it's fair to assume she too was seen as an inspiration to other women in the city. Obviously, she was not so popular to be recognized by Andrew Ryan, or perhaps she was and her plan didn't involve obscurity of identity, but I think we can establish a working theory that Anya was influential in Rapture as a shoemaker and inspired her clients and others who witnessed her very unique hairstyle for the time. I will mention very briefly that the design of the Baby Jane Splicer is different in BioShock 2, making the hairstyle more in style for the 1950s. But I'm continuing with my theory because in the first game it is so obviously a 1920s hairstyle. The popularity of the style they used for Baby Jane in 2 occurred in the mid-50s due to First Lady Mamie Eisenhower, which, if we will remember, would have been after Rapture was sealed off from the surface. It is also worth noting that, while we view the Roaring Twenties today as very glamorous and chic, during the time of BioShock, this period was considered very outdated and unfashionable. It was what your grandparents wore. It was basically light years away in style, as we can recall from our discussion on silhouettes of both the 1920s and the 40s. In fact, I don't believe there was a mainstream interest in the 1920s until the 1970s, with films like Cabaret and The Great Gatsby. There is another character, perhaps less obvious, that also seems to be influenced by 1920s inspired aesthetic. Sander Cohen in the first game proudly boasts a three-piece, double-breasted black tuxedo with tails, a silk white dress shirt, warm brown cravat beneath a dark-colored bow tie, a faux rose in his lapel, and leather two-toned white and beige dress shoes. Aside from the shoes, the entire outfit is peak formality, which, of course, reflects Cohen's character of pride, appearance, and showmanship. Although men's suits from the 19th century didn't change too drastically from then to the 1920s, Sander Cohen's various inspirations were all prominent figures during the 1920s onwards, such as Salvador Dali and George M. Cohen. Men of the 40s, having just experienced World War II and its aftermath, as well as having pulled through the Great Depression, took to re-wearing their suits from previous decades. Without going too far into it, Sander Cohen's scant history reveals a man who, like Andrew Ryan, rose to success during the 20s and 30s, having been a prolific artist topside that was influenced by the popular style. While the suits over the last several decades had remained more or less the same, one key characteristic marks Sander Cohen's look as more 20s and less 40s. The popularity of the bow tie boomed during the 1920s, fell out of favor during the 30s, and briefly returned during the early 40s. I dare connect the pieces with these bits of information, including Ryan and Cohen's camaraderie, that most likely affected his taste, and posit that Cohen maintained a 20s style as it coincided with his flourishing to success in society. As with Ryan, there is a presumed sentiment attached to that growth and experience. Sander Cohen himself is an interesting figure in-game that I truly enjoy looking at more in depth in another video. However, I'd like to look back to the game's history to further this idea of his affinity for the previous decade. Recall that Elizabeth came to Rapture and began working for Cohen as a singer. This provided her with insight to a world and time period to further blend in. Yet through Cohen, the influence of not only his favor for the 1920s, but also his flair for the dramatic would most likely lend to her adopting a similar style into her own appearance. Despite her claim of hating him, he would be, if anything, her initial understanding of Rapture and the 1940s. Therefore, the parts of her attire that could be deemed inappropriate for the time period could be intentional to denote her as many important things to her story, such as her connection to Cohen, her attempt to blend in with this notable fashion niche, and her visual appeal in the style that would be disarming to many. I will take another pause here to review the information thus far. Fashion had taken a drastic change from the beginning of 1900s onward to the mid-century. Changes were happening in society that could be reflected in the style of clothing people were wearing. As we see this correlation, we can start to imagine how fashion and style might have worked within Rapture. Due to the heyday of Andrew Ryan and Sandra Cohen, two prominent figures in Rapture, aligning with the peak of the 1920s and 30s design, it is a reasonable idea to assume this design began to seep into the fashion landscape of Rapture, as people became more and more entrenched in Ryan's ideologies, as well as remaining isolated like a time capsule at the bottom of the sea. Bold fashionistas like Anya Andersdotter and Elizabeth Comstock would style themselves in part on this previously popular style, incorporating very specific parts of the 20s fashion like very iconic hairstyles or certain makeup trends. Of course, what's much more likely is that the people who worked on the game had no clue what historical clothing looks like and didn't think anyone would look too closely at it, or wouldn't care. I have to laugh at the idea, not in an unkind way, because I am definitely the person who loves examining design and fashion, especially in a historical context, and tying it to reality to better understand it. Usually when a certain time period is used, its usage is intentional to portray some kind of further message. I don't believe that's necessarily what's going on here, to some extent, but I suppose I have to believe it may be so. It would make the design a lot more interesting. Thank you all so much for watching. I'm not sure how interested the general fan base will be in this type of video, but I really enjoyed putting this together, learning more about things I love like history, fashion, design, and video games. I know that many people feel like video games are an underrated medium for serious art and storytelling, and hopefully offering this perspective on a game I personally feel is art will help in legitimizing it by the way of critical study and analysis. I don't think I've ever seen anyone else really deep diving into the aesthetic of Rapture, at least not on YouTube. My hopes for this video also include teaching fans and others about the history of these choices to help deepen the meaning of, and therefore appreciation for, the work of BioShock. Once more, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please check out my other video, The BioShock Iceberg, for more BioShock related content. Also, would you kindly like and subscribe? More videos on BioShock are imminent at this point, as well as the next part to the fashion video where we continue to examine the style of the in-game universe. And until next time, cheers.